If I told you that I had pizza for dinner last night, you could probably just take my word for it. But if you really wanted to be sure, I could show you the box or maybe the receipt. Normal claims, normal evidence. If I told you that the moon is a spaceship controlled by gophers, you should expect a lot more evidence out of me. Because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And no, dreams and visions and feelings don't count. That's the best part about science, is that we expect evidence for every claim. And that evidence needs to be testable and falsifiable and replicatable and verifiable through multiple different lines that all point to the same conclusion. Because without that way of thinking, anybody could say anything and nobody would know who to believe. So if you want to be a scientist too, here's the rules. Number 1, question everything. Nothing is off limits. Number 2, assume nothing. Nobody gets to make you believe something just because they said to. And number 3, follow the evidence no matter where it leads.
Who's gonna tell VeggieTales that their main character is a fruit? The tomato is a fruit.
I am freaking out right now. So yes, a tomato is a fruit, but it's got multiple internal seeds, which means it's actually classified as a berry. So that's Bob the Berry. Now, I've never actually seen the show, except for one time it was on in the background at a religious friend's house. So I started thinking about that. And I was pretty sure that one of the creatures that I saw was a cucumber. So I looked it up, and sure enough, one of the main characters on the show is a cucumber named Larry. Cucumbers are fruits with multiple internal seeds, which means that's Larry the Berry, best friend to Bob the Berry. Then I dug a little deeper, because you've got all sorts of creatures in the show. You've got Mr. Nosser, that's a zucchini, berry. You've got Mr. Lunt, gourd, berry. Jimmy and Jerry are also gourds, berry and berry. The only things that aren't fruits on this are like some asparagus, some carrots, and some rhubarb. The vast majority of the creatures on this show are fruits, mostly berries. It should be called Fruit Tales, not veg. It's Fruit Tales.
Something completely normal that shouldn't gross you out, yet it does anyways.
I grew up very poor in Oklahoma, so I was always muddy and disgusting. I worked at an exotic animal sanctuary for years, so I was constantly covered in poop and pee and puke from whatever snake, lizard, bird, tortoise, you name it. I've had primates throw feces all over me. I've dissected a lot of human cadavers for my research. I've cut up brains and hearts and lungs. I literally sliced open a man's intestines once and scooped out all of the poop with my hands so that I could get a better look at his bile ducts. None of this bothers me, even a little bit. 3 things do. If I see a booger, I'm off food for a week. Cookies and cream or anything like that, if you have wet bread pieces in your food on purpose, gross. More than anything though, babies. With their disgusting little hands and their slimy faces. Always slimy. Ugh. Just take a shower and get a job. I want to address this video not just to this person, but to everybody who needs to hear this. It's very easy when you start to learn science to trick yourself that science is like this secret tome of knowledge that's up on some high lofty shelf and that you need to crawl and claw and scratch and fight and earn your right to go learn these secrets. And that's just not the case at all. My job as an educator is not to bring science down to your level. My job is to prove to you that science is right in front of you and it always has been. You're not learning some magical secrets. You're learning the language of nature. And once you can speak that language, you'll see it everywhere you go. And you'll find little pockets of things that you don't understand, and that'll drive you insane. And you'll have to dig into those and really get excited about learning them. And that is my advice. Start at that excitement and study what interests you most in the most irreverent way possible. This is a great question because this is something that is currently being debated by bioanthropologists today. We don't know whether the Neanderthals were a different species or if they were just like a super cold adapted subspecies of us. And the argument is driven by the fact that we have mountains of evidence showing that we interbred with Neanderthals like every single time we came across each other. So much so that most bioanthropologists now believe that we just absorbed them into our ranks rather than driving them to extinction the way that we previously thought that we had. But remember, this idea of if they can reproduce, then they're the same species is called the biological species concept. Concept. Not theory, not law, not definition. Because we have no idea what a species is. It's just a label that we humans came up with. There are like a dozen other species concepts. And by the ecological, evolutionary, phylogenetic, or my favorite, Hanesian species concept, we're definitely different species. But by the biological species concept, which happens to be the most common, we're not. So what do you think? Humans have the most complex language out of the whole animal kingdom. But when you consider the concept of language itself, having specific sounds that correlate to specific things in the real world, you realize that that is not unique to our species at all. Consider, for example, predator alarm calls. Diana monkeys have unique alarm calls for each individual kind of predator and how that predator might be attacking. Campbell's monkeys have prefixes and suffixes on their alarms that convey special information like whether they saw the predator themselves or they heard this other monkey talking about it over here. Vervet monkeys are able to identify not only the alarm call, but who made the alarm and who that individual's family members are that they need to go alert next. Baboons are particularly interesting because the sound for help me, I'm alone and the sound for I see a predator are very similar. But when you analyze them on a computer, you see that they have discrete and consistent differences, proving that they are different words that just sound the same like far and firewood with a southern accent. And yes, accents exist in the animal kingdom too. Anytime I teach about sharks, people love to bring up how they can smell a drop of blood and however many gallons of water, and that's sorta true, but it's not even close to the coolest thing about them. For example, did you know that they have special sensory organs for detecting electricity? These electroreceptors are called the ampullae of Lorenzini, which I love because it sounds like some sort of funky electric pasta. And they're so sensitive that they're able to detect the electrical nerve impulses in the muscles of fish. It's a big part of how they hunt. Also, their scales are weird. You see, most scales on fish are what we call leptoid scales, and that has to do with what they're made of and what their shape is and blah, blah, blah. But sharks don't have leptoid scales. They have placoid scales, which are made of dentin. Dentin, like what makes your teeth. Shark scales are made of the same stuff that makes teeth. They're not just weird blood-smelling monsters. They are lightning rods that are covered tip to tail in teeth. Elasmobranchs, man, they're freaking awesome. There is a long list of qualifications for what constitutes a language in human terms, and it would be very difficult for me to try to fit all those into one TikTok video and have it make any kind of sense at all, so instead of doing that, I just want you to know that sign language meets every single one of those qualifications. But it's way cooler than just having something sync up with some man-made list. Here's where it gets really interesting. The auditory cortex, the part of your brain that handles hearing things, lights up the same way in a deaf person watching sign language as it would in me hearing English. And similarly, stroke damage to the speech center of the brain causes them to not be able to use their hands properly, even though that should be controlled by a totally different part of your brain. Babies start babbling in their native language at about 9 months of age, especially right before bedtime, and deaf babies learning sign language start babbling with their hands at exactly the same time. Sign language has porosity, it has poetry, it has puns, and that brings me to my favorite sign. This is the sign for milk, so let me know in the comments, what do you think this sign means? Coprophagy is the scientific term for the eating of feces. And now you know that word. Do with that what you will. You're welcome. The great physicist Alan Lightman once wrote, "With infinite life comes an infinite list of relatives. Grandparents never die, nor do great-grandparents, great-aunts, and so on. Back through the generations, all alive and offering advice. Sons never escape from the shadows of their fathers, nor daughters from their mothers. No one ever comes into their own. Such is the cost of immortality. No person is whole, no person is free." It's admirable to want to expand the human lifespan, but to eradicate death entirely would come at a terrible cost. Ignoring the fact that we would very quickly run out of resources, death is a normal and natural part of life. Without new generations to lead the way, old outdated ideas would never be thrown out. New frontiers would never be discovered. Revolutions would never occur. And for me personally, remembering that I'm going to die, probably sooner than I think, is what keeps me fighting to make sure that my little bit of time makes everybody else's little bit of time just a little bit better. I'm about to show you what is easily one of my top 5 favorite fossils of all time. And here he is. This is not a Homo sapiens like you or me. This is Homo erectus. He lived about 1.7 million years ago in a place that we now call Dmanisi in the Republic of Georgia, just north of Turkey. And right away when you look at him, you'll notice he doesn't have any teeth. And if you look at his sockets, they're all healed up. This guy didn't lose his teeth yesterday. He lost them years and years before he died. The only way that this old man could have survived is if he had a family or a community that was making sure that he had soft, squishy foods and plenty of extra warmth at night. This skull proves that kindness and compassion and love were around over 1.5 million years before our species ever evolved. So anytime anybody ever asks you, where do morals come from? You evolved with them. You were born with them. Compassion is just part of being human.